Good morning, welcome to Breakfast with Naga Munchetti and John Kay.
Our headlines. People in some areas are having to travel more than 100 miles for coronavirus tests. The government says it's spending more to speed up testing.
A 14-day quarantine awaits passengers travelling from Greece back to Scotland from this morning.
Good morning. I'm in Liverpool, where these passengers are off to Portugal and Greece, but will they have to isolate on return? The boss of Heathrow Airport says passengers are playing quarantine roulette. I'll have the latest.
Russia faces international demands for an explanation after Germany said there is proof that one of President Putin's leading critics, Alexei Navalny, was poisoned with the nerve agent Novichok.
A new joy for the parents of Charlie Gard, 3 years after their first son died during a legal battle over medical treatment.
Charlie definitely did have a massive part to play in making sure his brother was healthy and to make us happy again, you know. Because after we lost Charlie, it just felt like a part of us died with him.
Good morning. The talks have begun. Barcelona say they won't let him go, but could Lionel Messi be on his way to the Premier League?
Good morning. We've got a band of cloud and rain sinking south across England and Wales at the moment. As that moves into the south, behind it we'll have sunshine and showers, but quite a blustery day. I'll have all the details in about half an hour.
Good morning. It's Thursday, the 3rd of September. Our top story is the rising demand for coronavirus tests in some areas has led to appointments being rationed, and some people are being sent more than 100 miles from home to get a swab.
Yeah, the government says areas with fewer cases have had their capacity reduced in order to cope with outbreaks elsewhere.
Well, let's talk to our political correspondent, Ian Watson. Morning, Ian. Good to see you. So what can we talk about in terms of where people can get tested and where people are actually going to be struggling to get more tests?
Well, I think this is really Naga, in the areas where perhaps there isn't as much prevalence of the virus any longer that people are having difficulties. These are for the drive-through tests. People can still get home testing kits. But we have seen, for example, examples where people in London, where the virus peaked early, are being directed towards testing centres as far away as Cardiff or the Isle of Wight. We've seen people in Devon, for example, being directed towards testing centres in Wales. People in Cumbria being directed towards testing centres in Scotland. The reason for that is that the Department of Health says, look, they're concentrating in the areas which are needed most, but they're also prioritising people who might be at most risk of serious infection. What they're also doing, though, is investing £500 million in trying to improve the rapidity of the tests. So the number of tests is likely to go up from around 350,000 to 500,000 in terms of capacity, but they're now trialling in Southampton much quicker tests where you can get results in 20 minutes. And the other thing they're going to be doing is in Salford, where you are, obviously, they're going to be trying to test the population far more regularly, even if they don't have symptoms, perhaps on a weekly basis. And this is something which the former Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, the former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, have been advocating for some time. They say that if you test people before they have symptoms or who remain asymptomatic, you get a better idea of the spread of the disease. And you can also get on top of the disease, hopefully to stem off this prospect of a second wave.
OK. Thanks very much for that, Ian. Ian Watson, our political correspondent.
Well, from today, people in Scotland will have different travel quarantine rules from the rest of the UK.
So Scottish holidaymakers returning from Greece will now have to isolate for 14 days. This is after new measures came in this morning. Louisa Pilbeam can explain more.
This fun in the sun in Greece now comes with 14 days quarantine if you're a Scottish resident. From 4 a.m. this morning, all Scots returning home from anywhere in Greece must self-isolate for 2 weeks, unlike holidaymakers from the rest of the UK.
We've got to get to Heathrow and we've got a flight from Heathrow to Glasgow, but we're there all day in London, and then so we can walk about in different airports, and then when we get to Glasgow, we've got to quarantine for 2 weeks.
Those risks led to the Welsh Government introducing quarantine for those returning from the popular tourist island of Zakynthos, but England and Northern Ireland currently have no quarantine for Greece. With cases rising in Portugal, that's the next destination of concern. James Williams is on holiday with his family in the Algarve, and they were meant to return Sunday. He spent nearly £400 on flights home tomorrow in case quarantine comes in.
I would like to go home so that I can go back to work on Monday. And my daughter goes back to school on Monday. And while obviously she could quarantine, I don't want her to quarantine. I don't want her to miss any more of her education because of this.
The government's benchmark for quarantine is when cases reach 20 in 100,000. Portugal has exceeded that, and a UK-wide update is due out later today. Louisa Pilbeam, BBC News.
For the latest news and analysis, watch BBC News programmes and investigations on BBC iPlayer.
Let's speak live now on Breakfast to the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock. Thanks for joining us, Mr Hancock.
Good morning.
We keep remembering that phrase we were told, a world-beating testing regime. And here we are with people still having to go more than 100 miles for a test. It's not working. You can't be happy with this.
Well, of course, there are operational challenges in any enormous system like one that we have where we test around 200,000 people a day. It's one of the biggest testing systems in the world. And but of course, I constantly want to improve it. And that's why this morning we've announced £500 million, £500 million of investment into the new generation of tests. Because whilst the testing system that we have at the moment is one of the biggest, I want to firstly make it much bigger, but also simpler for people, because you have to, at the moment, you have to go to the drive-through, and some people do have to travel if their local drive-through is full, and people will entirely understand why that's the case. But the next generation of tests, they don't need the swab to be taken and sent off to the lab and come back. You can get the results very rapidly. In the case of one that we're rolling out from today, you get the result within 20 minutes. So absolutely, I want to continue to improve this system. But frankly, over the last 6 months, we've built this absolutely vast testing capability, and I pay tribute to all the people who've worked with me on making that happen. OK, I'm sure a lot of people will welcome the news that there's this rapid testing being trialled and that it could be rolled out. But if you're one of our viewers who's been in touch this morning, somebody in London who's been told that to get a test today, they've got to go to South Wales. Somebody in Cumbria who says they've got to go to Dumfries. Somebody else in London who's been told to go to Leicester or to Birmingham Airport. She describes this as shameful and just doesn't understand why it can't be done closer to home. I mean, you're calling it operational difficulties and challenges. For her, it's a 5-hour round trip. That's not an operational difficulty, isn't it? It's a nightmare. Well, of course, the home testing route is also available, and we have tests available on the home testing route. And it's true that we've put a huge amount of testing into the areas of outbreak where the numbers of cases are much higher. I would say that if people need a test, the vast majority get it quickly and close to home. But when those testing centres are full, then obviously people are offered a test at the nearest place at which one is available. We've got significant demand for testing, but we've also got a very high capacity. And in any huge system like this, of course, there's operational challenges, as I mentioned. But I also want to solve the problem by having the next generation of test at a radically bigger scale. OK. And you can do that. You can't do that on the current technology very easily. We can keep expanding it, and we are. But I want to get to the point where we have this new generation where you don't have to send the thing off to the lab, and instead, effectively, the lab is in the back of a van and can go to the people who need the test, exactly as your viewers are saying. OK, so that's being trialled, as I understand it, in Salford, where we are right now, and also in parts of Hampshire. But how long is it going to be before that kind of technology, that kind of rapid testing result, is going to be available for everybody across the UK? Because that's little consolation. Knowing that it exists in a couple of trials is little consolation when you're told to do a 5-hour round trip today, is it? Well, yes, I would say that the most important message to your viewers is that if you have symptoms, you should go and get a test, and the vast majority of tests are available at the testing centre closest to you, or as a home test.
But my question is, when is that rapid testing that you're trialling and announcing today, this multi-million-pound announcement, when is that going to be widely, universally available?
Over the coming weeks and months. I mean, we're starting the rollout today.
OK, that's not very specific, is it? When we're looking ahead to a winter with a possible second wave, weeks and months sounds a bit vague. Can we be a bit more specific?
No, because I'm relying on brand new technology. We are working with the companies so that they can manufacture these kits as fast as possible. We're supporting them with the funding that I've announced today. All the way through this virus, I've been expanding the testing programme, and I'm absolutely driving this as fast as is humanly possible. But what I won't do when there are, there's 100 different companies that we're working with. We're able to talk about 3 today where we've verified those tests. And I'm going to be bringing more on and more on stream as fast as we possibly can. But it's just really important in the reporting of this as well, that I know that this morning, the news is leading on some of these operational challenges, but the vast majority of people get a test really easily. It's turned around so you get the result the next day, or you can get one at home. And the really important message for your viewers is, if you have symptoms, you must get a test.
Okay.
And that means we're able to find more and more of the cases that there are in the country, and this helps us suppress the virus, because at the moment the numbers of the virus, the cases of coronavirus are broadly flat. That isn't true in a lot of countries, and that's partly down to our testing and tracing capability, and critically the behaviour of the public. So if you have symptoms, please come forward and get a test. It is straightforward, it is easy, and the vast majority of people get one close to their home.
The trouble is, it's the beginning of September. We haven't even got to flu season and cold season, and already we've got people having to drive 100 miles to get a test or more. You've said that this new science will be available in the weeks and months, but you're not sure when. How can we as the public have confidence that this testing regime is going to operate successfully and at capacity properly during this winter?
Well, you can see that firstly by the fact that we have in the past 6 months built this enormous system that we have today. Secondly, by the fact that the vast majority of people get their test result close to home or at home, and that the vast majority, over 90%, get the result either the same day or the next day.
But this is just the beginning of the season. This is just the beginning of the autumn and winter season, isn't it? The demand is clearly going to increase in the weeks and months ahead. And if it can't really cope at the moment, how's it going to cope in October, November, December, January?
Well, it's all very well reading out the months of the year. What I can tell you is that the reason we're putting £500 million into the next generation tests is precisely to make sure that come winter, we have the testing capability, not only to ensure that, as now, everybody who has has the symptoms can get a test, but also to make sure that we've got this a mass testing capability, so that we can find the virus wherever it is, and also give the test to people so that if they test negative, they can have confidence, to get back to the things that make life worth living. So absolutely, I recognise the challenge. In fact, I'm the first to say that testing is an absolutely critical part of our response, and I have personally, driven this enormous expansion in our testing capability. And you're quite right that expanding that further over the autumn is absolutely critical. And so I'm delighted that we're putting in the extra resources now, and crucially working with the brand new technologies, sometimes before they're even in manufacture. But if you ask me to give an answer about when a new technology comes on stream at a scale that they're not even yet manufacturing, and I'm telling you the honest truth, which is that as as a nation, we are putting more effort into this than almost anywhere else in the world. We are getting it going as fast as humanly possible.
What about the here and now?
But it doesn't.
What about airports? A lot of people in the tourism industry, a lot of people in the aviation industry, holiday makers are saying, why don't you just do what a lot of people were suggesting weeks ago? Test at the airports as people return, rather than having them driving across the country to have a swab taken.
Yes, and there's a really good reason that we don't do that, and that is that the virus incubates in you, and therefore, if you test on day one on return, the scientists reckon that we find only about 7% of the total cases. So you still have to quarantine. And in fact, the countries around the world that have introduced this testing on arrival are now moving away from it and doing the testing much later because it doesn't clinically work. So this country, we've introduced this quarantine policy, and I know that it was controversial when we introduced it, but by God, I'm glad that we did. Because if you see the cases going up in France, in Spain, even in Germany, the case numbers are going up, and we've had to, in the cases of France and Spain, take that action to have the quarantine policy in place. It is an incredibly important policy because it's protecting this country and keeping us safe. And I will not undermine the actions that are needed to keep us safe. And of course I get the pressure from the airline industry, who totally understandably, are having a really difficult time. But we've got to keep people safe from this virus.
What about taking people with you over the weeks and months ahead? Because we've had so many big announcements from the government on all kinds of policy areas in recent weeks and months, which have ended up with a U-turn. I mean, face masks, free school meals, the algorithm and the exams. Isn't it difficult to keep public confidence, to lead the nation through this, when you've got the beginnings of a credibility problem?
Well, one of the reasons that I refused to your kind invitation to put a date on when mass testing is available, when it's impossible to know because the machines haven't been built yet, is because I don't want then to come on this programme in a couple of months' time and you point your finger and wag it at me and say, but you didn't hit that goal.
But the reason I asked you that is because that's what people want to know, isn't it?
They want to know. Of course,
they want to know when.
Nature.
But that wider point about U-turns, about policy changes again and again and again in recent months, it is a concern, isn't it? I mean, one of your own senior backbenchers says too often it looks like this government licks its finger, sticks it in the air to see which way the wind is blowing. That's one of your own MPs.
Well, I just think that people understand, actually, and your viewers understand, and they come and they say this to me all the time. People understand that we're in an unprecedented situation. We're dealing with a virus which we increasingly know more about. We're also dealing with a virus which suddenly expands in areas, and we get a whole outburst of cases, whether it's a country or a part of this country, and therefore we have to take action. And if the numbers change, then of course we change the action. We'll move swiftly and decisively to do what's necessary to control the virus.
If Jeremy Corbyn had won the election and was in power now and had changed his policy as many times as you guys have over the last few weeks, what would you be saying about his leadership and the way he's running the country?
Well, thank goodness that Jeremy Corbyn isn't running the country. That's what I'm saying, because we are using all of the science available. We're using all of the resources of the country, public sector, private sector, working very closely together to do everything we possibly can to both keep people safe and also restore some of the freedoms, get people back to work, get people back to school, which I'm really glad to see is happening in everywhere in the country this week.
And to the people who are getting back to Britain or heading off on holiday from Britain right now to Portugal, to Greece, and wondering what the policy is going to be on that and quarantining when they come back. Yeah. What do you say? How is that looking? Is Portugal likely to be back on the quarantine list, do you think, in the next few days?
Well, we make a formal announcement once a week on this, and so I don't want to prejudge that by announcing it on your show, even though I'd love to.
But I mean, it's looking quite likely if you look at the data, isn't it, that Portugal will be
What I'd say is that we look at the it is very much data driven. You're quite right to raise the data. It's very much driven by the data. It's a decision that we take, and if we have to introduce quarantine, we do that with a heavy heart. But people shouldn't travel unless they are prepared if the situation changes in the country they're going to, if they're not prepared to quarantine. And we'll make a formal announcement very shortly.
Matt Hancock, Health Secretary, thanks for joining us on Breakfast. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
See the headlines as they happen and watch BBC News live in the app and get the full story with bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.